"That's plenty, Susan," my mother yelled, her voice trembling with exasperation as she bent forward, staring at me intensely from across the dining table. The Christmas decorations on the tree sparkled beneath the soft light of the room's lamps, but the holiday atmosphere felt like a bitter mockery. I remained motionless, my fingers clutching my thighs, attempting to control the rage rising within me. My father added his voice, equally cutting. "You've consistently found ways to center everything around yourself." The statement stung more than anticipated, and momentarily all I could detect was the gentle ticking from the mantelpiece clock. "I go by Susan Blanchard." At that time, I was 32, and these events unfolded during the latter part of the 1970s. It was an era when families depended heavily on one another, particularly here in the countryside of Illinois. Our ancestral family farm, inherited through multiple generations, served as our life's foundation, though it was fighting to survive financially. Years before, I had relocated to Chicago to pursue law, a choice my parents continued to view as defiance against our traditional lifestyle. In the meantime, my elder sibling Jake remained at home, managing the farm operations while enjoying their continuous admiration. I held no grudge against him for staying. I resented how, regardless of my achievements, I remained perpetually the outsider. Throughout the summer months, I had been discreetly transferring funds into the farm's joint banking account, attempting to assist with the expenses Jake claimed were accumulating. He persuaded me to keep our parents uninformed, arguing it would damage their dignity and create feelings of failure. At the moment, his reasoning seemed logical. I wished to avoid embarrassing them and believed Jake would manage appropriately. However, as I sat there during Christmas Eve, hearing our parents praise Jake's supposed sacrifices to maintain the farm's viability, I felt devastated. I understood immediately that he had been claiming responsibility for every cent I had contributed. "Jake is the sole reason we've managed to continue operating," my mother declared, her voice heavy with admiration. "We'd be lost without his efforts." I glanced toward him, anticipating perhaps some recognition or remorse in his expression, but he simply grinned, reclining in his seat as though he found the situation entertaining. That moment prompted me to finally speak up. "In reality," I began, my voice quivering yet audible enough to interrupt their conversation, "I have been the person transferring the funds monthly since July." My father laughed dismissively, shaking his head as if I had uttered something completely absurd. "Stop fabricating stories, Susan. Jake has been present daily, working tirelessly for this family. What would possess you to make such a claim?" His words were painful, but the condescending manner truly wounded me. My mother folded her arms and continued, "You've consistently attempted to make yourself the focal point. Really, Susan, it's Christmas. Must we destroy the evening with such foolishness?" I felt my cheeks burn with a combination of fury and embarrassment. "I'm not fabricating anything," I responded, my voice more resolute. "I've been making deposits at the Chicago Bank branch, directly into the farm's account. Every single transaction originated from me. Yet they weren't even paying attention." My father dismissed me with an irritated gesture, while my mother directed her attention to Jake, who merely shrugged as if he was completely clueless about my statements. The exasperation was overwhelming, and I understood that convincing them at that moment was impossible. They had already formed their conclusions. I faced Jake directly, my voice cutting. "Will you truly continue sitting there, lying about this? Jake, you're aware I've been making those Chicago branch deposits throughout these months." He remained unfazed. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, smirking as if everything was amusing. "I'm completely unaware of what you're discussing, Susan," he said with a shrug, his tone filled with false naivety. My anger reached its peak. "Incredible," I whispered, shaking my head, but our parents seemed indifferent. My father sighed heavily as if I were spoiling the evening, and my mother cast Jake a compassionate look as though he were suffering from some ridiculous allegation. I rose from my seat, the chair grinding against the floor, and stared directly at Jake. "You know precisely what I'm referring to," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Those deposits weren't insignificant, Jake. You've been sitting here allowing our parents to think you're some sort of savior when you've done nothing except deceive. If you won't confess now, I'll depart tomorrow morning, return to Chicago, and obtain the evidence myself. Jake shrugged, leaning back as if none of this was significant. You're wasting effort, Susan, he said with a chuckle. Whatever tale you've invented, go ahead and prove it. In that instant, I realized Jake didn't believe I would actually follow through. To him, this was merely another family dispute that would eventually fade, where I'd ultimately surrender and allow him to prevail as usual. His smirk revealed everything. He assumed I'd retreat, too frightened of the consequences to take action. But that only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't going to permit him to continue succeeding with this behavior, not this time. He had exploited me, deceived our parents, and sat there absorbing their praise while treating my contributions as non-existent. No, I was going to Chicago, and I was going to ensure everyone discovered the truth. The following morning early, I gathered my belongings, unable to endure another moment in that home. I informed our parents of my departure, and predictably my mother sighed, her voice laden with disappointment. "It's Christmas, Susan," she said as if I were ruining everything. My father didn't even glance up from his coffee. "Can't spend a single holiday without creating drama," he mumbled. Jake barely concealed his satisfaction, lounging arrogantly in his chair as if he had triumphed. But I wasn't remaining, not with everyone behaving as if I were the problem. I understood the banks would be closed, but I didn't mind. I simply needed to escape from there, away from their criticism and his deceptions. The journey back to Chicago seemed infinite, the roads eerily silent with most people home celebrating with their loved ones. I gripped the steering wheel firmly, the frigid winter air penetrating the car despite the heater running at full blast. My mind churned, replaying all the events from the previous night. Jake truly didn't think I would go through with it. That was obvious. He probably expected me to sulk quietly, too intimidated by our parents' unwavering trust in him to actually leave. But this occasion was different. I was exhausted from being dismissed, tired of allowing him to mistreat me. As I drove past snow-blanketed fields and frozen waterways, one thing was definite. I would obtain those receipts, and I would ensure the truth emerged. When the banks resumed operations several days later, I went directly to the Chicago branch. It was extremely cold that morning, the type of cold that burned your face and made each breath feel harsh. Upon entering, I headed straight to the counter where a middle-aged clerk welcomed me with a courteous smile.
"Good morning," he said.
"How may I assist you today?" I explained carefully yet firmly that I required copies of every deposit I had made to the Blanchard Farm account since July. The clerk nodded and went to the back, returning with a thick ledger and a small machine that produced receipts. He meticulously looked up the account and began processing each record through the machine, which hummed and clicked as it printed transaction copies. I observed each receipt emerge one by one, displaying my name, the dates, and amounts clearly. He handed me the stack with a polite, "Here you are, ma'am. Please let us know if you need anything else." I thanked him, my hands trembling slightly as I held the receipts. They represented more than just paper, they were evidence. Evidence that Jake had been lying and evidence that I wouldn't let this matter rest. With the receipts in my possession, I headed straight back to my vehicle. The roads remained slippery from the earlier week snowstorm, but I didn't care. I needed to return home and wasn't about to wait another day. The receipts sat beside me on the passenger seat, neatly organized and secured under a small paperweight I had grabbed from my desk before departing. Every time I glanced at them, my anger resurged. I couldn't believe Jake thought he could escape consequences, and worse, that our parents had so readily supported him. The drive felt extended this time, the farm appearing more distant with each passing mile. As I traveled through quiet towns and frozen landscapes, my thoughts raced. I replayed every conversation from Christmas Eve, every dismissive glance, every smug expression on Jake's face. By the time I entered the long driveway leading to the farmhouse, the adrenaline had accumulated so intensely that my hands were virtually trembling. I wasn't certain how this would unfold, but I knew one thing absolutely. I wasn't departing until they witnessed the truth with their own eyes. I entered the house, the receipts gripped firmly in my hand, the outdoor cold still clinging to my coat. My mother was in the kitchen stirring a pot on the stove while my father sat in his customary position at the dining table reading the newspaper. Jake was leaning against the counter casually eating an apple, appearing as smug as ever. They all turned to observe me as I entered, but before anyone could speak, I dropped the stack of receipts onto the table before my father. "There," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Every deposit I've made to the farm account since July. It's all documented there, my name, the dates, the amounts." My father set down his newspaper, frowning as he picked up the receipts and began examining them. My mother approached, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression initially skeptical. Jake didn't move from his position, but I noticed how his smirk wavered for just an instant. "This cannot be accurate," my father muttered, flipping through the pages. "Why would you do this, Susan?" My mother's eyes narrowed as she leaned in to examine for herself. "Jake said he's been handling everything," she said, her voice mixing confusion with disbelief. I turned to Jake, meeting his gaze directly. "Well, Jake," I asked, my tone sharp, "are you still going to lie about it now?" Jake laughed, tossing the apple core into the trash as if none of this mattered. "Susan, I don't know where you obtained those, but they're not genuine. You probably falsified them somehow to make me appear bad." His tone was calm, almost mocking, and it made my stomach churn. I looked at our parents, expecting at least a hint of doubt in their eyes, but instead, my father shook his head, his face dark with disapproval. "Susan, what has come over you?" he said, his voice low and angry. "This is a new low, even for you." My mother grabbed the receipts from the table, holding them up as if they were contaminated. "Did you think we wouldn't see through this?" she said, her voice shaking. "Jake has been here every day working to keep this farm operational, and you," she pointed the stack of papers toward me, "you return here with some counterfeit documents and expect us to believe it. You've always been so desperate for attention." My chest felt constricted as I struggled to suppress tears. "They're not fake," I said, my voice trembling. "You can contact the bank yourself if you don't believe me." But they weren't listening. They stood there united in their defense of Jake, as always, while I was left feeling like a stranger in my own family. I stood there shocked as my father tossed the receipts onto the table like they were refuse. "I cannot believe this," I said, my voice rising as the weight of their disbelief overwhelmed me. "Even when I present you with proof right here in black and white, you still defend him. This is incredible. I've spent months helping you maintain this farm's operation, and all you've done is give Jake credit and call me a liar." Jake crossed his arms, leaning against the counter with a smug expression that made my blood boil. "Don't be so theatrical, Susan," he said, shrugging as if none of it mattered. "You've always been envious. This isn't any different." I couldn't contain it anymore. "You know what? I'm finished. Don't expect me to ever return here. I've had enough of this." My mother's face tightened, and my father simply shook his head in disappointment, as if I were the one in the wrong. Without another word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. The cold air struck me like a slap, but it felt better than remaining in that house for another second. By the time I returned to Chicago, I had made up my mind. I was done. No more bending over backward for people who couldn't even bother to see the truth when it was right before them. The first thing I did after unpacking was call the bank and halt the deposits. "No further transfers to that account," I told the teller, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. It felt strange, like severing a cord that had connected me to the farm all these months, but it also felt liberating, like I was finally done carrying a burden that was never truly mine to bear. At first, I thought I'd feel guilty, but I didn't. Every time I thought about Jake's smug face and our parents' refusal to believe me, it only reinforced my decision. Let Jake handle it now. Let him be the hero he pretended to be. I wasn't going to keep throwing money into a farm that treated me like an outsider. If they wanted to believe his lies, then they could deal with the consequences when the bills started accumulating, and they would, because Jake didn't have a cent to his name. 6 months passed without any communication from my family, no phone calls, no letters, nothing. I thought about them sometimes, but every time I did, the anger and hurt came flooding back, so I pushed it aside and focused on my work. Then one afternoon in the middle of summer, there was a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened it, I froze. Standing there were my mother and father, looking tired and somewhat sheepish. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. "May we come in?" my father asked, his voice quieter than usual. My mother stood next to him, clutching her purse tightly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped aside and let them in. They sat awkwardly on the couch, looking around my small apartment as if they didn't know what to do with themselves. "What do you want?" I finally asked, leaning against the armrest of a chair, my arms crossed. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. Whatever they had to say, I wanted it out in the open. My father cleared his throat, staring at the floor as if it might give him the words he needed. "Susan," he began, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it, "we owe you an apology. A significant one." My mother nodded, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. "We were wrong," she said softly. "We didn't believe you when you tried to tell us the truth, and we need to make this right." I crossed my arms, leaning back against the chair. "Go on," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. My father sighed heavily. "After you left, things began falling apart on the farm. Bills accumulated, equipment needed repairs we couldn't afford, and the crops didn't generate enough income to keep us going. Initially, we didn't understand and thought Jake had it under control. He kept telling us he'd figure it out, but he didn't. And when we pressed him, he finally confessed." My mother's eyes were brimming with tears as she spoke. "He admitted it, Susan. He told us you were the one making the deposits all those months, that you were the reason we stayed afloat. We couldn't believe it. Not just that he lied, but that we didn't listen to you when you tried to tell us." She reached out, her voice trembling. "We're sorry, Susan. Truly sorry for not believing you, for how we treated you, for everything. You didn't deserve any of it." I looked at them, their faces lined with regret, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine shame. My father finally met my eyes. "We're asking for your forgiveness, Susan. I know we don't deserve it, but we had to come here and tell you the truth. You saved the farm, and we owe you more than an apology." I sat there staring at them for a moment, letting their words hang in the air. Part of me wanted to let the silence stretch on forever, make them sit with their guilt, but instead, I finally asked, "Where's Jake?" My voice was calm, but the anger simmered just beneath the surface. My mother exchanged a nervous glance with my father before she spoke. "He's still at the farm," she said quietly. "He wanted to come with us, but, well, we thought it was better if we spoke to you alone first." My father nodded, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "He's been keeping to himself since he admitted everything. I think he knows there's no excuse for what he did. He's ashamed, Susan." "Ashamed?" I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. "That's rich. Ashamed after months of letting you believe I was some kind of liar? After taking credit for everything I did to keep the farm running?" My father looked down again, his face pale. "You're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We let it go on far too long. It's on us as much as it is on him. But he wanted us to tell you that he's sorry. He said he doesn't expect you to forgive him, but he needed us to say it." "He wanted you to tell me?" I snapped, leaning forward in my chair. "What are you talking about? You're still protecting him even now. He should be here apologizing to me directly. You should have forced him to come here." My voice echoed through the small apartment, and I could see the shock on their faces, but I didn't care. I was done tiptoeing around their favoritism. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "Do you even hear yourselves? He lies, he manipulates, he takes everything I did and twists it into some heroic story for himself. And now when it's time to take responsibility, you're still shielding him. What? He's too embarrassed to face me, so you're here to clean up his mess again. Do you even realize how insane that sounds?" My father shifted uncomfortably, his hands gripping his knees. "We thought this would be easier for everyone," he muttered. "Easier for whom?" I shot back. "For Jake? For you? Because it sure as hell isn't easier for me." Neither of them said a word after that. My mother looked down at her hands, twisting the strap of her purse nervously, while my father stared at the floor, his jaw tight. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable, until finally my father stood up. "You're right," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "We should have brought him. We should have made him face you. I don't know why we didn't. Maybe because we've been making excuses for him for so long. It's just what we do." My mother followed his lead, standing up and clutching her purse to her chest. She looked at me with watery eyes, but there was no defense left in her. "We're sorry, Susan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You deserved better from all of us." Without waiting for response, they walked toward the door. My father opened it, glancing back at me for just a moment, his face filled with regret. Then they were gone, the door clicking shut behind them. For a long time, I just sat there, the weight of their shame hanging in the room like a ghost. They knew I was right, and for the first time in my life, it felt like they actually saw it too. A week later, there was another knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened it, my stomach turned. Jake was standing there, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, looking about as miserable as I'd ever seen him. "Susan," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Can I come in for a moment?" I thought about slamming the door in his face, but instead, I stepped aside, letting him in without saying a word. He stood awkwardly in the middle of my living room, not sitting down, not taking off his jacket, just shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I came to apologize," he finally said, his eyes darting around like he couldn't bring himself to look at me. "For everything. For lying, for taking credit for the money you sent, for letting Mom and Dad treat you the way they did." His voice cracked slightly, but I didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. "I don't have an excuse.
I was jealous of you, Susan. I've always been jealous.
You've accomplished so much with your life, and I stayed behind. I thought if I could just keep their approval, I'd feel, I don't know, important, I guess. But it was wrong. All of it." Jake's voice broke completely, and before I could say anything, he dropped his head into his hands and started to cry. Big, heavy sobs that shook his whole body. It wasn't the kind of crying you fake. It was raw, filled with shame, and for the first time, I saw just how broken he really was. He didn't try to hide it, and for a moment, I just stood there, unsure of what to say or do. After that day, something shifted. My parents didn't call right away, but when they finally did, their tone was different. There was no defensiveness, no excuses, no trying to sugarcoat Jake's actions. It was clear they'd finally stopped protecting him. They didn't openly admit it, but I could tell they were treating him differently. My father mentioned they'd started handling the farm finances themselves, and my mother let slip that Jake was working to make things right. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. As for Jake, he stayed out of my way after that apology. He didn't try to mend things too quickly, which was fine by me. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. But knowing that my parents had finally seen him for who he was and acknowledged the hurt they'd caused me was enough to give me some peace. From that day on, even though things were never perfect in my family, at least they started being more fair.
Hey there.
Did you enjoy the story? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us tremendously and ensures you won't miss out on more excellent stories we share here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.